Hello and welcome to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and good evening to our participants in this webinar which is the first of a series of webinars launched by the World Bank and the Queen Rania Foundation in Jordan under the title Advancing Arabic Language Teaching and Learning in the context of a path to reducing learning poverty in the MENA region. Today's dialogue will be about Arabic language and the science of reading. And one of the subjects that was being discussed or that was covered by the recent report launched by the World Bank that was published on 20 June of this year. The report was titled A Path to Reducing Learning Poverty in MENA, Arabic and the Science of Reading, which was done with the collaboration of the Queen Rania Foundation. This report aims to examine the factors that raise to high learning poverty rates, specifically in various areas of the Middle East and North Africa region. And for you to be informed of this dialogue, we will be hearing two opening remarks from Mr. Bassem Saad, who is the CEO of the Queen Rania Foundation, following by an opening remark by Mr. Andreas Blom, who is the education manager at the World Bank for the MENA region. And the dialogue will be with the various guests. Some of them were presenters in this a webinar previously. I will introduce you quickly. We will have Dr. Zainab Ibrahim from Carnegie Mellon, and also Dr. Hanad Taha, who is an endowed professor of Arabic language at Zayed University, and Mr. Michael Crawford, who is a lead education specialist at the World Bank, and Professor Reem Khamis, who is a professor and chair of communication sciences and disorders at Adelphi University in New York. We are very pleased to host you, everyone, and we will give the opening remarks first to Mr. Bassem. Thank you, Amal. Good evening and welcome to our distinguished guests. We are pleased to begin the first webinar, which is the first of a series of webinars for advancing Arabic language teaching and learning, and hoping that this would be a launching point for advancing Arabic language teaching and learning. The most important recommendations in the World Bank's report is the need to find a national reading strategy for each country that takes into consideration the challenges, the opportunities, and the specific paths. And Jordan has embarked on serious steps to reduce learning poverty and raise the quality of learning through developing a national strategy for improving reading proficiency with the collaboration of the Ministry of Education. For us at the Queen Rania Foundation, learning and teaching Arabic is very important, and it is the focus point of our strategic work because we believe that Arabic proficiency, reading and writing is the basis for education in all the subjects and empowers us to communicate throughout life. In the past 2 decades, we dedicated our efforts to advance Arabic and Arabic reading, and we worked with experts to conduct researches on Arabic language teaching and learning. And we also launched free resources to empower parents to motivate their children to learn Arabic. And we also developed a website which is a resource toolkit for Arabic language teachers who are teaching primary and elementary schools to resort to the recommendations. We also have various Arabic language resources that teachers can download for free. Some of them are reading resources, activities, and tools. We are very pleased today to launch this joint webinar on advancing Arabic language teaching and learning. And today will be the start of a series of dialogues that bring us together to exchange experiences in order to achieve our objective in advancing Arabic Arabic language teaching and learning. We thank the World Bank and the elite group of speakers who will enrich this dialogue with their expertise. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you a successful and pleasant webinar that will draw the working steps towards this effort. Thank you very much, Mr. Bassem, and thank you for your efforts at the Queen Rania Foundation for this beautiful path of a dialogue that we hope will enrich our knowledge. And now we will move on to Mr. Andrea Blom from the World Bank. Mr. Andrea Blom. Andreas Blom.
Thank you very much, Amal, and thank you very much, Dr. Bassam, for your remarks and for our partnership with Queen Rania Foundation. From the World Bank perspective, we are extremely delighted to launch this webinar series. It builds upon the report that we launched in June of this year, focusing on Arabic literacy. It is for us an absolutely key goal to advance Arabic literacy in the Middle East and North Africa region. The World Bank is the largest external investor in education. In the MENA region, we invest more than $2 billion into education. And the first and foremost goal we have is to teach children to read, because this is the fundamental of a good education. And a good education is the fundamental for a happy, productive life out of poverty. The most sustainable way out of poverty is education. And that's why learning to read is so fundamental. Afterwards, they can then read to learn. We know, unfortunately, that we have a big challenge ahead of us. Prior to the pandemic, we had 6 out of 10 children in the region that could not read a simple text and comprehend that single text. And that was before the pandemic. We know that the school closures over the last 18 months have affected the youngest students most. These are the ones that have had to miss so much education. And we feel that those 6 out of 10 perhaps now have grown to 7 or 8 out of 10. So our task is urgent. We really need to work together to help these children learn to read. And that's part of what we want to achieve with this webinar series. We know that it is not just something that has to come from the World Bank. It has to be a partnership. We have to go together with countries, as Dr. Bassam was mentioning, that is driving this process, but also together with educators, together with the experts in the science of reading that we have on the panelists today. We hope to bring experts together. We hope to share the knowledge and the good practices that exist around literacy. Notably, lots of new technologies that are interesting, that can be deployed. We also want to raise that awareness of the good practices together in this partnership. We know that many of the panelists today and the participants, you probably have yourself a number of good practices that you would like to share. We would love to listen to that and share and distribute that knowledge across, because it is something that we'll all have to do in partnership if we want to move forward on this. So I hope very much at the end of this webinar, there'll be a survey. Please take the time to fill it out so that we can build this network and a partnership for the future. After this webinar, there is another 4 webinars that will move forward on the Arabic literacy. We will examine items around, in particular, teacher effectiveness, learning and resources, but also assessments and how to support struggling readers. There's lots of other aspects that we can go into. So please stay tuned. I'm super excited about today's webinar. And I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Bassam, the panelists, but also you, the participants. And Amal, thank you very much for coordinating and shepherding us through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andreas Blom. And now we move on to beginning with the questions about the recent report of the World Bank. And we will begin with Dr. Henada Taha. So I can reintroduce you to everyone. Of course, everyone knows you, but to those who did not attend our previous sessions, Dr. Henada is currently a professor of Arabic language and a research assistant for research at Zaid University. Previously, she was a dean at the University of Bahrain and assistant dean, and she also worked at San Diego University in California as a professor of Arabic language and director of language programs. Hanada was an advisor for several Arabic institutions and international organizations such as the World Bank, USAID, DLI, and she also worked with the executive office at the UAE. She designed the first Arabic language arts state-of-the-art curriculum program. She has a very rich background, and we hope to benefit from you, Dr. Hanada, from your recent participation in the recent or the last report launched by the World Bank. But we want to ask you, to advance Arabic language teaching and learning, can you explain to us and to the audience the reasons behind the need to raise the importance of Arabic language and the science of reading, and why there was such a deep research on this matter? Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Amal, and thank you to everyone for this very important webinar, in my opinion, where we will be discussing an organic matter, a matter that contains the basis of any economic advancement in the major Arabic region. It could be beneficial at the outset to introduce you quickly about the science of reading, because these terms are, yes, they are being used, but it is always good to start from a common starting point. The science of reading is the summary of results done around the past 20 years in many fields, not only in education and teaching, but in education and public education, private education, in the neurological sciences, in many fields. And that gave us a deeper understanding of how we learn how to read and what are the skills that we need in order to read at a proficient level, and how these skills interact together, and how we can fill in the gaps within the brain pertaining to the development of the skills, such as, for example, repetitive training, identification of sounds, pronunciation, working on methodologized texts, training on the using of strong, rich vocabulary, understanding, comprehension. These are all the basics of reading that a student or child cannot advance or progress in education in general and in reading in specific without learning these basic skills. And the reason why we are presenting these issues now, of course, is because you all know the results of the examinations that Arabic language students are scoring, these examinations that test their reading comprehension. We are always at the bottom of the list of the countries that are undertaking these exams in reading and comprehension. So the implications of those on the Middle East and North Africa regions, the economic implications, the developmental implications, the implications on the advancement of these societies, also in terms of learning and raising up from the cycle of poverty or extremism. The basics of all of these is proficiency in reading and writing and comprehending what is being read. Of course, it is important to discuss these subjects now and to adhere to the learning opportunities that are being wasted. There are large budgets in the Middle East and North Africa region that are being spent on education without seeing that's seeing the outcomes such as a knowledge-based economy or a prosperous economy, Arabic language has this diglossia. We see this gap between modern standard Arabic and colloquial and dialects without the society working on bridging these gaps. So the gap between the home and school, the first 5 years that have been wasted for children without books, without the awareness of the importance of reading, without the importance of being exposed to modern standard Arabic, without being exposed to various subjects. So right now, we are facing major challenges in education and teaching and development and economy, where we need to start to dismantle or to tackle the reasons behind these challenges. And we have to reiterate that proficiency in reading and learning is the basis and the fundamentals that we need, and we have to begin working on them in a methodological way and a sustainable way, so that we launch these potentials in the region, and also the economic potentials that we all have systems that are being enclosed, and we are seeing the inability to use Arabic language in a good way. You referred to sustainable methods. So it is not only pertaining to the short term. And maybe now we can move on to Dr. Haytham Taha. Dr. Haytham Taha is a researcher in the field of learning disabilities, reading psychology, and cognitive skills. His main research interest is in investigating the basic cognitive and neurocognitive process in reading among typical and disabled native Arab readers, or those who have special needs. Dr. Haytham, the report by the World Bank was very close to your specialization, and it referred to your fields of expertise broadly. Can you tell us a little bit about your field of work and to what extent it is tied to the science of reading, and how this science is present in the tools that teachers need to help students read in Arabic? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for hosting me in this important meeting. Of course, I read the report. It is a very important report, and it is very broad, and it covers the importance of reading, Arabic language teaching and learning in the Middle East, North Africa region, and anywhere in the Arabic-speaking world. The science of reading that is also tied to my field of research, as you mentioned. I'm more specialized in strategies, research, and methods that allow persons to be enabled with the cognitive skills, and that allow the reader to advance his reading and become more fluent, and to reinforce the reading fluency. And the research that allows us to understand, or the reader or the student to grasp the skills, they begin with the understanding the language and the upper level comprehension skills. But first of all, we want to reach a basic understanding when it comes to understanding researchers. And here we start from our study in the past 20 years in the field of the psychology of reading and cognitive skills pertaining to cognitive identification has many elements tied to it, where when we read Arabic and identify the words specifically, some of the skills here are tied to the specifications of writing, the shapes of the letters, the change of the alphabets, the letters, and Some of them are tied to the specificities of the Arabic language and the diglossia between modern standard Arabic and dialects and colloquial, and the language environment that the student is exposed to at home and the environment is exposed to at school, and what the student relies on. Could sometimes be referred to as a foreign language, and also the impact of elements on the cognitive and neurological skills of ordinary readers and readers with difficulties. We can say that today we refer to the importance of strengthening the skills of the teacher, and then the science of reading and the mechanism of teaching reading from a scientific perspective, and to separate between the Arabic language teacher as a teacher who is teaching Arabic language, Arabic grammar from a language perspective, and a reading teacher who is skilled with the comprehension of the science and the psychology and the cognitive skills of reading, so that he can perform his duty as a teacher of the reading skills and be aware the whole time of the elements that the factors that could negatively impact the teachers and hinder their ability from learning to read. Where they could end up facing difficulties, or they already have difficulties, or they come from poor environments, they have learning disabilities, and everything that is written is important to be taught to the students at an early age. Some researchers, for example, that I have personally undertaken, we examining today what is known as the role of learning semantic activation in expediting the process of reading, in order to allow the students to quickly identify new words that are unfamiliar. When a reader first starts to read, he reads the words that have the alphabets he recognizes immediately. And some of the words are familiar. And the enforcing or reinforcing or the enrichment of the language comprehension for students will make it fast for first-time readers. And this asserts the importance of allowing the student at an early stage to learn elements pertaining to the modern standard Arabic, to converse in MSA, in order to make it fast for him to read when he reaches first grade or second grade. For example, it is very important to assert here and go back to the idea that I proposed first. We have to be very aware about when it comes to differentiating between a Arabic language teacher and a reading teacher who's supposed to be an expert. And this differentiation constitutes a big part in overcoming the challenges that students face. Unfortunately, many teachers at the schools, they focus all their efforts on teaching Arabic language from a language perspective, where the student loses the ability to read quickly. And training the teachers should take a new path today, in my opinion, when teachers are trained to teach reading in the early grades, whereby they should be they should have the of course the linguistic skills, the developmental skills, and the psychological skills. This is in my opinion. Thank you very much, Dr. Haytham. You have perhaps set us on the right track today, where we can differentiate between a teacher of Arabic language, grammar, etc., and a teacher of reading. This is an important point that you raised, and maybe Dr. Zainab Ibrahim who is a teaching professor of Arabic studies at Carnegie Mellon and the sociolinguist of Arabic. Professor Zainab teaches Arabic as a foreign language. She earned her PhD from Georgetown in Washington, and she has an MA in teaching Arabic as a foreign language and another master's in communication, both of them from the American University in Cairo. And she has written many books, such as Beyond Lexical Variation in Modern Standard Arabic, Egypt, Lebanon, and Morocco, in addition to many books and articles that were published. So we are very pleased to have you with us, Dr. Zainab. Maybe we can ask you in this regard about your experience with the with many schools, and you're dealing with many teachers and the differentiation between the science of reading and language. Can you tell us today about your experiences and what can you tell us about the science of reading in this regard?
First of all, thank you to you and to the attendees. I have to say, I am a believer that any teacher, be they a science teacher or math teacher, they have to study certain things about humanities and the means and methods for teaching, and they have to be on top of innovative ideas, because this will help them. We are not teachers, and so based on this, I teach students how to learn, because all modern or recent studies demonstrate that students learn 70% of their knowledge outside the classroom. So we equip students with the means to learn at all times. I conducted a study and I discovered how afraid students are about the Arabic language. So I decided to start with students before the primary stage of education. And I found out, I took into consideration all the points that raised by my colleagues. First of all, I worked with the classroom teacher, and I used to attend the classroom. And the agreement was that we always speak in the Fusha language. And if students use the dialect, we would help them. I hope we would know also that the students, when they come to school at the age of 5 years old, they already have linguistic knowledge, but we dismiss it. So when a student says a word in the Egyptian dialect, for example, for pen, we say alam. So I would tell him simply that you use alam at home and qalam at school. And this is already present in the curriculum. We use in most dialects uq'ud, which is sit down. And then in the books, we use the word ijlis. And it's as though the two languages, the two words are different. So why don't I teach up my students to say it in the right way? And 3 months later, I use a different word, which is jalasa. So we built, myself and my colleague Abbasid Tunsi, we established a curriculum for these students, which is how to take them from the dialect to the Fusha language. And I wanted to also instill in them love for the Arabic language without saying you should love the Arabic language. So I also had to establish this among the 5 or 6 year old students. If they sit for more than 15 minutes, this is a miracle in itself. For that reason, we designed the classroom such that every 15 minutes, we would do an activity that allowed them to move around the classroom. As for reading, when we focused on this, and thanks to God, there was another classroom which taught in a traditional manner. We focus on tying or linking the form. So we would write the letter B, not in all forms, just one form. But that form, we tied it to the sound. And we used to say, what words do you know that use this letter? So they would start, and in a while we would take them to write it. So first of all, we start with the getting to know the sound, and after that, writing it. And we write it in its various forms. In the other classroom, they taught them the names of the letters, which is A, B, C, D. And after that, they would give them words and they forced them to memorize these words. And they would say they are reading these words. The truth is they are just memorizing them. So we try to move away from from rote education. So we used the ability of the student to recognize the letters. And then we said, what is this? They would say, this is B. It's not important for me to have them say B, but we just want them to recognize the sound. After that, they would use the ba, and then they would use the word bab. So they would do this by themselves. And so with each letter or alphabet, we gave them words that would allow them to start reading. So this is the way to do it, just to equip the student with a method to learn, not to have them memorize. I hope that I have replied to your question. Yes, of course you have, and you have taken us to the reality through dealing with life examples in our schools. And we can discuss it later on. But let us first listen to a non-Arab voice. We have with us Mr. Michael Crawford, lead education specialist at the World Bank. Mr. Michael, he works in the International World Practice on Education and learning, and he has played a leading role in this field in developing learning skills. Mr. Michael, he's also he leads this practice, and he also conducts analytical work in developing general knowledge at the World Bank, in addition to his work in various fields in the region. Mr. Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much. I would
like to ask you a question concerning your work. You have been
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to take part in this dialogue. It's very exciting to me to hear what's happening and the way attitudes are changing and the ideas about reading are changing. So I'd like to say very simply that the concept of learning poverty, we wanted to be very simple in the following sense. Reading, a child's journey towards reading can stop, and when it stops, that's a really big problem because it's just very hard to get going again. So we wanted to see that the journey towards reading is happening for all children, and when they get to age 10, they feel good. They're on solid ground, all children, as readers. it reinforces the belief that all children can learn to read and read to a high level. So we've looked at this as a way of focusing attention on this basic task in school. The feeling was, if a child's progress towards becoming a reader stops, that needs attention. It doesn't, we can't go on to other aspects of school when the very basic task that they need may have stopped. And so it raises the question that you all are dealing with of why is it stopping? Or when it stops, why did it stop? How do we get it going again? What techniques do we use? Do we ask teachers to use to be sure that the child is taking steps every day and to becoming the type of reader that can really be great for the child, be great for the child's family as an adult, for their society, their ability to earn a living. So I'd just like to say a couple of things and maybe use a little bit of an example of how I think you're taking, as a group, taking that challenge and now moving into very constructive ways of changing how things are done. And I'd like to frame it in this way. I hear that you're on the verge of a kind of generational change where you're replacing dry memorization. You're seeking to have teachers replace dry memorization with what I like to call joyful pattern recognition. Okay. Because what students need to do, when you think of things in this way, you say a couple of things. You say, look, we as teachers, we value the language that students bring to our classroom. We value that they can learn to read whatever vocabulary they have. We value it. We value it because it's a bridge to their future learning. It's a bridge to the time when they get better and better in modern standard Arabic, but it's their starting point. So I think the first thing that's really important that's coming out of this is a way for teachers to understand their work as a bridge to very high skills in the future. And as a reaffirmation that all new knowledge builds on existing knowledge. So whatever type of vocabulary, whatever type of whatever within the diglossia, whatever language a child brings to the classroom, I think that the attitude now is on the cusp of saying that's where we start, and let's build bridges to those future skills. So within that, I just want to do one short example, which I think builds on some of the things that people are saying. It's an example from English, but I think it may be helpful. There is a time, the science of reading shows us, there's a time when children are learning 8 to 10 new words a day. And I said to myself, when I became familiar with this research, I said, that's crazy. I could never memorize 8 to 10 words a day. And then I read through and I said, no, the reason is because they're recognizing the patterns and the logic. Okay, so then I said, okay, that makes sense to me. So I know, the English words harm and pain and thought. And then I realized that I can say in English thoughtful or thoughtless, mindful or mindless, painful or painless. And now I've just expanded my vocabulary. But here's the problem. I can say grateful, but I can't say greatless, right? I can't, and then there's some things. So what I see is that this science is telling us that teachers have to become familiar with what children bring and the logic that builds bridges, the way they build bridges to those high level skills they want. And it's a lot of work, but you're getting ready to do that work. And you're building that, I think, around this kind of joyful pattern recognition, because all children love learning. And when you do it this way, you build on that level of learning, you build on their sense of accomplishment and not on the frustration. Imagine you got 10 words to learn on Monday, another 10 words on Tuesday, another 10 on Wednesday, another 10 on Thursday. By the end of the week, you have a frustrated child. So all across the region, you say, well, we're going to unlock your ability to really enjoy the recognition of patterns and you've got a lot of potential in there. You're going to learn 50 words, okay? But you're going to learn them in a very different way. And I think you're really doing the work that allows that shift to take place. So really happy to be included in this dialogue, really excited about the results you're getting, and really hopeful to see this really detailed work now continue. So let me stop there and thank you again.
نتذكر أن اللغة العربية من أثرى لغات العالم، نتحدث عن أكثر من 2
Reem Khamis now is with us. She is a professor and chairman of communication sciences and disorders, and she at Adelphi University in New York, and she has a PhD in clinical and speech pathology, and she's also works with Columbia University, and she has a long career in this field. Welcome, Professor Reem. Perhaps as a specialist in speech pathology and problems, you have become a specialist in teaching Arabic and the means to teach them. Can you please tell us about your motives for entering this field, and how is this need for all specializations to work together to improve reading skills? Thank you, Amal, and I would like to thank Rania Foundation and the World Bank for organizing this webinar, so as a society we can start to work on resolving this problem. And I specialize in dealing with learning problems and speech problems, but my specialization is new in the Arab world, and we assess and evaluate and deal with speech problems. One of the things that we learn is language. And what we see in a report by the World Bank, and I believe it's a new methodological step regarding teaching reading from speech to print and print to speech approach. And I'm sorry, I don't use the Arabic language very often. So our understanding based on research is that now we understand that language is manifested in reading and writing. So any intervention or education on teaching Arabic has to be based on a deep understanding of Arabic and how language develops. So here comes my role as a specialist in language, so we can introduce a new perspective from the pedagogue and work with pedagogists and experts in learning disabilities like Dr. Haytham. So we all bring to a new understanding that allows us to build something that is effective and to achieve, and that allows us to achieve the intended results. When we look at the current findings, there is a failure. So we try to transform this failure into success, and we have to change the way we think, our ideological understanding of language. And we have to understand that language is reading and writing, and any teaching of Arabic, of reading and writing has to be based on the development of language and how it's organized in the brain and how networks work together. And if we don't do this, we won't be able to achieve any good results. What we have heard here from very many experts can be understood as follows. When Dr. Zainab talked about diagnostic awareness, we can understand it if we look at the development of language amongst Arab students. It involves knowledge of the dialect being spoken in their own respective communities, and the learning of the Fusha, and the two are intertwined. So when we start to look at language as a culturally authentic experience rather than based on what we have learned from English or any other language, and now we say we want to work in teaching Arabic or learning Arabic as a foreign language, we would be missing very important opportunities that would lead to innovation and among students. So we'd be losing these opportunities. This is the first point that I want to say. I'm an expert in communication, and I believe it's very important for us to understand language and how it develops cognitively, and then we can reach a conclusion about how we should be doing. I read the report, and I believe it's a qualitative jump, because it took us back to research that talks about Arabic and its development. And it also showed us that there is missing research that needs to be done. But our launching point is that we have to pose the questions that will that relate to the teaching and learning of Arabic rather than any other language. So we shouldn't start with English and say, how does it apply to Arabic? So we have to understand how we can inform research on the English language and benefit in the development of Arabic language skills. There's another important point. It has to do with the way we think as researchers. I believe we will be finding new points that we can inform the understanding about the link between reading and writing, and we can also inform the rest of the world. As part of my own development as a researcher, I started my research on focusing on what Chomsky says, and I wanted to apply it to Arabic, and I did some good work. But then after that, I stopped trying to do research that is in line with foreign or with research on the English language, and I focused on the development of language in my own community. And so I broke this cycle of now we find out that Arabic speaking students, they develop their skills in the Fusha and in the dialect in a parallel manner. So in the beginning, their dialect influences their understanding of the Fusha, but after that, the Fusha dominates. And diglossia, I found out, is not a problem because it's a good experience. It brings benefits to the students. I see how my own nieces transform or move back and forth from the dialect to the Fusha in a way that a speaker of one language does not have. So this is one point I want to emphasize. We have to move away from imperialist, the cultural imperialism, and see how things work on the ground. What we heard today, whether from Michael when he talked about patterns, we know that Arabic morphology is very rich, and we have to begin to understand the morphological patterns, but also from the perspective of the Arabic language. So this would be based on verbs and patterns, and we have to think in a different way rather than just translate English curricula and try to apply them to Arabic. So we have to focus on knowledge related to the Arabic language. We have a linguist, Dr. Zainab, who's enriching this study. So we have Dr. Haytham, who has great work on neuroscience and learning disabilities. We have to focus on cognitive development and assessment. And we have experts. Dr. Hanada is translating all research that has been done in a practical way. So we need research that doesn't exist, so that we need research related to our own reality. This is what I have to say. Yes, you opened a question and the road for these questions. So what are these questions that we have to pose in studying Arabic? But perhaps you have opened the way for our discussion now. Dr. Hanada, we go back to you about diglossia in Arabic. How can we use this as a source of enrichment, especially that in the Arab world and the Arab region, we have many dialects from the Levant to the Arab Maghreb. How can we bridge this duality to inform and benefit in the teaching of Fusha? Thank you very much, Dr. Amal and all the speakers we've heard. I believe now, if anyone wants to put an EGK on my head, they would understand how many questions I have. So I'm very thankful to everyone. This is a fundamental discussion, and I had hoped that teachers would be able to attend it. We need Arabic teachers to be here, and the ministers of education in this region also to hear us and be present. They will be hearing us, even if we're forced to send it to them by email. Your question is very important, and I believe perhaps we have to start with the attitudes. How can we look how do we look at language? If we read many studies, we find that sometimes they look at this diglossia that is present in Arabic. They look at it as a problem or a catastrophe or a cause. Some studies pointed out that this is the reason for the backwardness in Arabic language learning in the Arab world. As a region, as a Middle East and North Africa region, we have to decide or determine the discourse in this area, and we have to drive it. We have to say, no, this is the beauty of the Arabic language, that we have the mother language, which is the Fusha, and from there we have all these vines flowing, and that they are all related to this mother. And when we talk about the dialects, that they all feed into the mother language in terms of vocabulary. And today, this morning, I was in a car. What are the derivatives of? And suddenly I thought about Qurban, which is trying to get closer to God. So the Qurban, the word which is, so many derivatives of this word, and this is a word that is used in all dialects. In Masr, in Egypt, they say Aribi, and in Palestine, they say Qaraibi, and some say Qaribi. So we have so many derivatives, and in the Gulf region, we also use the same word. So we see variations of the same theme. The intonation is different, but it's the same word. So I think we have to talk of this derivation in Arabic. So first of all, attitudes. We have to change this attitudes. Who gave this bad reputation to this diglossia in Arabic? This is enrichment, and this is a wealth, and this is the beauty of the Arabic language. I believe most of us perfect more than one dialect. I am Lebanese, and then I can speak in the Palestinian language dialect, and then we've all watched the Egyptian movies. When I visited Morocco, I also learned how to speak Moroccan. So there is no divorce between the dialects and the Arabic Fusha language. Also, we have to work on bridging in the curriculum, but like what Dr. Zainab Haytham Reem and Mr. Michael, we have to find the bridges between the dialect and Fusha, because the difference is not that huge. And we have to find the real scientific studies, perhaps with funding from countries, to see how dialects in each Arabic country is linked to the Fusha. Because the truth is, we have only a small study conducted in the Palestinian territories, as far as I know. But so we have a shortage in scientific study, but I believe we have a lot of information and a lot of things that we have to work on, as far as attitudes among people and curriculum and the training of students to bridge this issue between the dialect and the
that
Fusha.
will allow us to bridge the gap. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanada. The last point you mentioned was the shortcomings in scientific research. Perhaps I will add to that the Arabic scientific research regarding the Arabic thoughts that are not translated. Maybe this is what we need in the teaching field. Perhaps Dr. Zainab, the World Bank report talked about innovation and providing the space to teach students reading. How can we introduce the Arabic language teaching and MSA language teaching in many fields of innovation compared to what the report mentioned about teaching other languages? Before I answer this question, first of all, I want to assert 2 points mentioned by Dr. Hanada. First of all, there is a wonderful book written by Kristen Brusted. It's called Spoken Arabic. It compares what the one who is proficient in Egyptian, Moroccan, Lebanese dialects, and it compares between the 4 dialects and the modern standard Arabic and the ancient Arabic. I believe that this work is great. A second thing, I did a study and I used the oldest dictionary, which was issued in the year 100 Hijri. And it is a very ancient dictionary. And most of the language in it is from the ancient Arabic, and it does not use the Egyptian dialect. Everybody said that this is not modern standard Arabic. I hope, or I want you to know that there is no person who speaks Arabic, who knows the exact relation between the ancient Arabic, modern standard Arabic, and the classical Arabic and the dialects. This is very important. Most of the dialects use some classical Arabic because the speakers felt comfortable when using Arabic. And therefore, they resorted to using the classical traditional Arabic. This is why these words are in the modern standard Arabic. In modern standard Arabic, you can say جاءت الرجال. If you say that, and it is wrong because of the change of rules. The underlying structure is جاءت مجموعة من الرجال, which is a group of men came and not men came. This is due to the gender in the verbs and nouns. When I did this research and I worked with a partner, most of the learning methods were done through smart toys. And we have a problem also with the curricula. There is no review or reinforcing of what students are taught. Something is taught to them once or twice, and the student is expected to learn it or memorize it forever. Traditional toys such as bingo and others, but all of them were about alphabets and then about words. And because this was going to be a group work, because a student at an early age, when he is being taught, this is for the students who need assistance, further assistance. The students who did the work, even they would teach them how to write on the smart boards. So some students had some difficulties in writing. So another student would come, hold the hand of the student facing the difficulty and help them in the writing. And they played with the toys and teams and groups using the words to reinforce the words and the alphabets. But now, tablets are expensive nowadays. And I believe that today, most of the states give their students iPads so that they can learn through an iPad. And these toys can be downloaded on the iPad, and the student can use these toys to reinforce the learning process at home. We used to give them homework, which was a homework of listening to cartoons in modern standard Arabic. And this helped them to a great extent. Wonderful. These are one of the methods that could help students how to read. From another side, as we are talking amongst each other, we can take some questions from some of the audiences. Somebody asked, if we teach phonetics to students and then give them, which is better? Is it better first to begin with the phonetic transcription, teaching them the phonetics and then the words? I believe that the question is it better to teach through phonetics or through the words? Yes, that's true. There is still a debate going on between many educators. There are some who believe that teaching the student the word in itself, and those who believe in beginning first with the phonetics and then integrating the alphabets or the letters. There are many researches that have been done to teach the student how to read better and through which method. whereby the student, whatever word he is faced with, could begin with the phonetic identification and grouping them together. Of course, this method requires cognitive skills, effective cognitive skills to allow the student to learn. Some students, due to some developmental problems, find it difficult to fuse the sounds. And here, when we train the students on incorporating the sounds, supports them greatly. And we have to teach them the phonetics and teach the student that the phonetics does not change even though the location of the word or if the letter changes. And we have to teach them on other aspects. When we talk about the cognitive identification, from the level of education or from the level of cognitive skills, here we have to see to what extent the student is being taught these processes before. Is it before they reach the level of reading? Before reaching this level, we have to reinforce the environment of teaching the student the alphabets. We know from about studies done about in the past 15 years, there was something known as statistical learning. When we are learning a language, we learn the meanings of the words, where there is a certain pattern that makes it easy for our brain to detect it, to identify it, and to expect it. And this also is related to the visual recognition of letters and words. The student, in one way or another, according to scientific studies, will begin to develop implicit theories about the shapes of certain letters and the sounds of these letters before he begins to read the letters in a word itself. So we are preparing the student to recognize the letter, to prepare him in some way mentally to accept these letters as being familiar. And we use this method after we did the mechanism of statistical learning. We examined how Arabic students in kindergarten accept the written words, knowing that words in Arabic the letters are all tied together, such as balad, which means country, versus walad, which means child, because the waw letter is not tied to other letters. But the common, the words that are, what we have most in common in Arabic are words composed of letters that are linked together or tied together. And there are some words that are partially, whose letters are partially tied or fully linked. Many people are surprised that with the study that we did, we presented the children with certain letters, and we asked them to identify whether this is a word or this is just some gibberish writing, for example. Even though the preference method of the student allowed them, because this is how they view the Arabic language, because in Arabic, the words are composed of letters that are linked to each other, like in cursive English. So from here, we move on to the idea of the change of the shape of the letter in Arabic when it is being written in a word, we have to teach the student to train their brain to identify the different changes. And sometimes there is a visual acceptance of the individual letters in a word rather than the letters or the alphabets that are tied. And with the statistical learning allows us to accept more. What is more important here is that the more we reinforce the environment to be rich with phonetic influences, this will help the student better. For example, the word kas in Arabic, which means cup. For example, when you mentioned environment, doctor, I don't like to, I don't want to interrupt you, but we would like to take a large number of questions possible. Since you mentioned environment, and we have a school environment, we have the home environment, the question is to you, Michael.
Development, and are there any creative ways to help children comprehend what they are reading, especially at the beginning?
So thank you. Let me offer a few thoughts on this. I think that one of the most powerful things that parents can do is to create a series of good associations with reading from the earliest age. So the one way of doing that is to avoid especially harsh reprimands or negative feedback that might make the child, sort of think, oh my gosh, this reading, it's where I can make a mistake and disappoint my parent or disappoint an important person in my life. But then also to have reading be associated with lots of special feelings, right? And so in a lot of cases, you do what might be bedtime reading, where it's a special time for parent and child to be together. And the nature of the things that are read are enjoyable. Rhyming, which rhyming is good from just the very technical point of view for recognition of sound, but it's also good because kids like it. And so you think of an experience where you have a parent or a sibling, okay, and sometimes you're sitting in a cozy setting and you have a book that the child enjoys, and then you do this in a way that shows it's fun. And so you create the desire, you create the associations for the child. I want to be a reader. Boy, I just remember, I have all these good memories. Another thing that's often done is parents sometimes put their finger along the words, things like this, that while you're having a good experience, you're also directing the child's attention to the words, but not teaching. You're going to let the teaching happen later on, but you're giving them a lot of practice in a good environment. And so they start to see that when they think of reading, they think of, boy, I remember all those great rhymes I learned. I remember sitting with my sibling or with one of my parents, and that just felt so good. And that really is priceless in the way it motivates, because one of the major findings from the science of reading from all different contexts is, at a certain point, readers teach themselves because they go to the library and they get books, and each book they read makes them a better reader. It grows their vocabulary. It grows their knowledge of syntax. It grows their background knowledge. Okay, and then they grow up to be adults who surround themselves with books, right? And who read on a daily basis, which is what we want. So I think the most important thing in the home environment is, no matter what level of ability the parents have in reading, is to create a sense of positive associations with reading and to avoid the negative and to put the child on the path to have reading be exciting, something that they naturally want to do it anyway, but then I think that often really grows, and that can give the teacher the advantage of motivated students And then the teacher, of course, has to build on that, avoiding the harsh reprimands, building on the love of reading. And that's something I don't think is taken advantage of enough, that policies that promote this. I think there's room to improve those types of policies and set the groundwork for young readers in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Perhaps also one of the questions in this webinar, there's a question from the attendance.
There is
through my own dealing with children as an author for children's story, I find out that at the beginning of their life, they love reading, but over time, they do not want to do anything with learning and targeted learning in particular. So what advice would you give to deal with this case? The question is to you, Professor Reem. Sorry, no worries. First of all, I would like to add 2 comments on the questions posed before about teaching alphabet in a sound, using the sound approach. All speech to print methods and print to speech. Currently, it's now we're moving from speech to print. And we have to remember also that we try to develop a whole world approach. We were talking about societies like the American society, white people who have access to books and reading. And that's the reason why we adopted the whole world approach. My son at the age of 6 months could recognize Toys R Us because there was a culture that exposed children to words. So they could read words before even going to kindergarten. But in these societies, there are studies that summarize this experience and say, we have to go back to speech to print approach. Why? Because as humans, our brains are developed in such a way that can we acquire language naturally, but reading and writing are an ability that was developed by humans. And it also, we use our learning skills in order to read and write. So reading and writing is a representation of language. So when anything we want to start with, any teacher would understand they have to encourage students to learn. So we start with sound because students come to school already knowing how and recognizing these sounds. It's very important. One other important thing is equity in learning. If we use the whole word approach, we're not fair to all students because there are differences between students whose parents have books around at home and they have all the toys recommended by the New York Times or other places. There are students who would come to school without these experiences. So it would not be fair to them if we adopted the whole word approach. So this was an important point. With respect to parents, and I'm sorry to be adding new points, one of the projects here in New York that I'm involved in, we bring Arabic speaking parents of students at the age of 3. We work with them over a 10-week period to develop the importance of talking to children at an early age and strategies about how we talk to the child, how we talk about what we eat. So all these activities are intended to help parents give more to their own children. One of my most important findings, whenever I asked parents about their experiences with their children. 0 to 2 years of age is a missing experience. So in Arabic society, for one reason or the other, before children start to speak, we don't deal with language as something that is our responsibility. So I believe we are in need of a whole societal awareness campaign to give parents a better understanding of how children develop, and that the brain and its development is to expose these children to language. So between the age of 0 to 3, this is a very important age, and the language incentive would be the best incentive for cognitive development. So it's very important for me to talk to my own child and tell him, and give him, tell him that it's raining, and I describe that the rain is making the sound of tick, 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 tick. So we have to start thinking about projects that would help these children develop. The last point with respect to books, the report of the World Bank demonstrated that a large number of parents do not have books at home. We heard about the Emirates that gave tax deductions to parents who would start to purchase books. But I believe that the other problem that we have to work on is are the books that we are developing appropriate for the certain ages of students. So it's no surprise that children lose interest in learning in reading after the age of 10. So we have more books for the for ages less than 10, rather than books intended for children after the age of 10, like addressing bullying and other issues related to these students. So at the age of teenagers, we have to understand they are a part of the global community. They don't want to read about a camel and a farm. We have to find things that are more relevant to their lives, about TikTok and their own experiences in life. And here comes our own role too. Schools. I have my son in an Arabic teaching school, and I don't know any school, at least the ones that I attended, that ask your own child to read anything over the summer. So as adults, we have to demonstrate that we are actually reading and we're interested in reading and talk about the things we read. The last point, and I will conclude here because I've taken too much time. The parents also have to be involved in the children's learning experience. It's important for you to talk to your own children and to participate in what they're learning, and to talk to also and communicate with teachers to know what the students are doing and what things can change. We have a role to play. It's not enough to think that we just send them to school. We are a part of the team, and that is working on this. Thank you very much, Professor Reem. The last question is to you, Dr. Hanada. Are there research or good, solid studies that address the number of words that students should learn at the age of 6? Some focus on the alphabetical order and in studying the alphabets. Are there scientific studies that focus on that? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. With respect to research on words that children should know at a certain age, I have not seen study on Arabic. There are studies conducted on the English language. Perhaps some colleagues know something that I'm not aware of, but I don't see anything that is specifically on the Arabic language. I know that recently in Jordan, there was a book published on vocabulary of common words among students. I have not seen the book, so I do not know what studies it's been based on, or that this dictionary was based on. But the second question was about studies on what, please? The best or ideal method for the alphabetical order of the Arabic language. Yes, I believe that today in Arabic curriculum, there is more than one method for the alphabetical order. We have the two different forms. I know there are two other ways to order the alphabet. One is based on the ease of the writing the alphabet, and the learning of these alphabets was based on this. But there is another method which is based on the ease of pronouncing these alphabets, like the ba, tha, zal, because they are among the first alphabets or sounds that a child produces. I don't believe there's agreement on what the ideal order of vocabulary of alphabets is, but I believe the alif, ba, ta, tha is not very useful in teaching. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanada, for this response. And I want to thank you all for your participation in a discussion that I believe is very important. You have managed to enrich the Arabic learning discussion by joining us with your new specializations on pronunciation and speech to enrich the teaching children. You all agreed on the importance of innovation and the creation of or finding more creativity in teaching students, and in addition to the diglossia in Arabic language. So this is something that we need to continue in order to ensure there's a better learning experience and to teach reading in a way that makes reading a separate science from teaching language. And it's important that for, not to mention also the importance of the engagement of parents. Last but not least, and based on what Professor Reem said, our students, in order for them to really love reading, they have to find read like books that really relate to them and that benefit them. And all this is our role as academics and specialists also from the World Bank and from the Queen Rania Foundation. We all have to find, we have to ensure that all Arab students across the MENA region are able to read and find it interesting. We also have to mention that these discussions will continue and will take us into the middle of next year. We have to address many issues like resources for the Arabic language in November. In January 2022, we will be discussing the preparation of Arabic language teachers. We will try to involve also ministers of education. There's also a need to evaluate teaching methods that will take place in March. We'll be talking about how we can support people with speech difficulty, with learning difficulties. And there will be a survey that will arrive to you, will be sent to you via email tomorrow. And we hope that we will get your own feedback on these webinars. And we hope you will tell us what we should be discussing in future webinars. Thank you to everyone and to the Queen Rania Foundation. I was delighted to moderate this discussion. Until next time, thank you.